What's up, Spartans? Hope everybody's having a fantastic week so far. It's Wednesday. That means we're going to do a lunch and learn today. So continuing on the nutrition track, we've talked about carbohydrates. We've talked about protein. We've talked about a couple of other things, eating whole foods, veggies, all that type of stuff. We're going to talk today about food cravings. I know that food cravings can be a challenge for all of us, and there's really a lot of things that we can do within our general rules that we've set forth in the Spartan Lifestyle Program to help you with food cravings. But today what we're going to do is we're going to give you some information around certain cravings, what may be causing these cravings, and how to eliminate those or combat those types of cravings. So let's get started today. So I'm going to pull up and screen share my notes again. Here we go. And we're on. So cravings, like I said, most of us have it in some aspect and have struggled in some ways. We're going to talk about 4 different cravings that are very common, and then we're going to kind of go over these 4 rules to help you eliminate some of those cravings or at least minimize some of those cravings. So first one, carbohydrates and sugar. Remember that those words are the same thing. Carbohydrates and sugar are exactly the same thing. Now, sugar has been given a bad name, but there's good sugars and there's bad sugars. There's sugars that come from fruits that are good sugars, come from vegetables, good sugars, and there are fruits that come from lemon heads, and there's fruits that come from Sour Patch Kids, bad sugars, okay? So we gotta be mindful of those sugars. We talked about last week or the week before about the glycemic index, and that's how you know where a sugar kind of falls in that good or bad range. Your low glycemics are going to be more of your vegetables. Your high glycemics are going to be your candies, okay? So one of the reasons that we have cravings for carbohydrates or sugars is we have low blood sugar, right? Blood sugar is the main energy source and the quickest energy source that our body can use to function in every way, whether it be from brain function to running a mile to deadlifting 200 pounds, okay? So blood sugar can play an impact. When our blood sugar gets too low and it's not sufficient to our normal levels, and maybe our normal levels are too high, maybe our normal levels are just right, but regardless, when our blood sugar drops, we find ourselves craving those sugars. Now, if we eat refined sugars, this causes a sudden spike in insulin, a sudden spike in our blood sugar, and then a subsequent crash leading to that hunger. So for instance, if you guys have eaten a piece of candy, like I talked about on Friday, and then found yourself eating more and more and more right after having some, and you find yourself overeating some of those sweet treats, that is because of that high insulin spike and then that subsequent crash. What we want to do is we want to try to stabilize that out. How we stabilize that out is going lower in the glycemic index or into carbohydrates that burn a little bit slower within the body. This causes a pleasure response to sweets, okay? So if I'm constantly giving myself a piece of candy to quench an afternoon hunger, right? For instance, we're running to the break room, we're going somewhere, we're grabbing a candy bar out of the machine or even a cookie or even a small piece of chocolate. What we're doing is we're creating this pleasure response to that, right? And that pleasure response, we're getting that instant rush, that insulin spike, that's helping our hormones, that's giving us that drop of dopamine, and then that crash, okay? That is the same thing as addiction, okay? So as we're doing that, if we're constantly feeding ourselves, say, soda, right, with full sugar in it, we have that dopamine spike, and then it crashes. Then the next time that we need that soda, we need more sugar to create a higher dopamine response, and then a subsequent crash, okay? So we gotta be mindful of eating those sugars and those cravings and where those carbohydrates are coming from, because it's going to cause that up and down all the time, which can also lead to some neurological responses of addiction to that. Another thing that can cause us to crave carbohydrates is a lack of sleep, okay? The reason for this lack of sleep is that it deregulates or alters our hunger hormones, the one being Ghrelin, which increases hunger. So when our sleep is lacking, we're not getting enough sleep, we find ourselves tired. So what happens is our body responds by elevating its Ghrelin or its hunger response to try to find more energy. At the same time, it reduces our leptin. We talked about that a while ago when we talked about protein. But leptin is impacted by protein. Protein actually raises leptin, but carbohydrates and lack of sleep decreases our leptin, okay? So it decreases our satiety, it decreases our satisfaction with our current level of calories. And that balance can lead us to want more quick carbohydrates. Now, how do we combat that? Make sure that we're eating complex carbohydrates. Like we talked about, veggies are gonna be huge, high fiber fruits. So a high fiber fruit would be strawberries because you have the nuts on the outside, blueberries because the skin's a little bit thicker, pears and apples because you're eating the skins, as opposed to say watermelon, a little less fiber in the watermelon, but there's a ton of water in that. Bananas are very low in fiber, so those would be a little less complex carbohydrates. Biggest thing is I always tell people, you're not going to overeat fruit. You're not going to have an issue with overeating fruit. So at any time, as you're getting started and you're trying to reduce the refined sugars, if a banana is what you like to go for, even though it's not the best fruit to choose, pick the banana over, say, the refined sugars or the sweet or the chocolate or whatever the case may be, okay? Also, another way to combat this is pair your carbohydrates in each meal with proteins and some fats. So that's why we talk about having a balanced meal each meal. One of the biggest ones is sometimes at breakfast, we'll go with oatmeal. Yes, it's more of a whole grain, which has a little bit more fiber, but it's still a lot of carbohydrates. And unless we're adding some protein to that, it's gonna burn off pretty fast. That's why I think that eggs are the best, because they're great for the breakfast time, but they also add that good fat and that protein to it to help slowly digest, if we're having bread with it, slowly digest those a little bit more refined carbohydrates coming from the bread. Now, balancing our meals and making sure that we have carbohydrates, proteins, and fats at each meal will help regulate those two hormones that we talked about, the ghrelin and the leptin, okay? Put those at normal levels and help us feel satiated and slow down the digestive process, keeping our blood sugar level throughout the day. Last thing is, make sure that you're getting your sleep, okay? We should be at 6 hours minimum. 7 to 8 is going to be an optimal, and above 8 is going to be ideal, okay? So make sure you're getting that sleep. Next one is salty foods, okay? Salty foods is the body's response to dehydration. It's looking to increase its hydration balance, okay? Now, there's a lot of different times that we got to keep in mind. We'll talk about that in a second. Science also indicates that a lack of sodium may also play roles. But unless you're eating super clean, I would say that water is the first issue. Why is that? Because if we're eating, say, bread has sodium in it. Other processed meats have sodium in it. For a majority of us, unless we're eating super clean and we're staying really consistent, it's not so much a low sodium. It's not that we need more salt. It's that we need more hydration. We need to drink more water and make sure that we're balanced. One thing to be mindful of is dry days, okay? One thing that we often forget as we get to this time of the year, it gets a little bit colder out. I am bad at this. I'd rather drink coffee or something hot rather than water. But coffee is a diuretic as well. It can dehydrate you. But when we get into these dry days, we may not feel the sweat. We may not feel our body losing all of its water, but the air is actually pulling more water out of us. Plus we have showers, we have the heater running. All those dry atmospheres pulls the water out of our body, leading us to be more dehydrated. We also need to be aware of those really hot days. So the great thing about most of us living in the Midwest is we should just be drinking water regularly throughout the year. Other things to keep in mind as far as dehydration is alcohol. Alcohol is a diuretic. The reason is the body has to get rid of all of its water so that it makes sure that it dilutes the alcohol in the blood so that we don't poison ourselves. It also has to help the liver and the kidneys filter through all that. So it's going to start to use a lot of the water that's in the body to get rid of that toxin. We've talked about it before. Eating a ton of processed foods will also lead to a lot of dehydration because a lot of those chemicals that are in those foods are toxins, and the body, again, is going to use a lot of the water to flush those out, okay? Next thing is exercise, okay? Exercise or working outside. Some of us in the summer, some of us in the fall can find ourselves doing a lot of yard work, losing a lot of water that way. Also, if we have an intense workout, a lot of cardiovascular in it, Maybe we're just typical, we sweat quite a bit when we do some strength training, those types of things. We have to be mindful of those exercise days in which we start to really dehydrate ourselves. If we're not making sure to replenish our body with that water, it could lead to some salty food. Now, another way to make sure that we kind of avoid those salty foods when we're talking mainly around hydration is set timers to drink water, okay? Set a timer to make sure that you're at, say, 48 ounces by lunchtime. If you're at 84 by dinner time, and then have a little bit of water. You also got to be mindful with your water intake of how it affects you at night. So at the beginning, it's going to be important to front load a lot of your water so that you can kind of balance yourself out, especially as you're bringing in more water than usual. The body's going to try to balance itself out by flushing, by putting you in the bathroom more often. But as you get better and as you get more consistent, you can find you can drink water all the way up to the moment you go to bed and then still not be getting up in the middle of the night. Okay, so those are things you got to kind of play with yourself. Other ways to look at that, other than setting those timers to be at certain landmarks, I would say 120 ounces over the day would be pretty general rule for most all of us. But make sure that you're having 12 ounces minimum at each one of your meals. Not only will this help you digest food, it'll help you with the hydration factor, like we've talked about before. When water comes in with nutrient-dense food, the body is a lot more likely to hold on to that for a hydration standpoint because it sees those micronutrients, it sees those vitamins and minerals in that water and is going to hang on to that water so that it can absorb those vitamins and minerals. Next one, fatty food. Fatty food cravings are usually an indication that you need more calories. And yes, a majority of us are on a weight loss journey, but through experience of working with a lot of clients and current clients in the program, I would say that almost half of our issues with why we're retaining so much body fat is some of us just don't eat enough, okay? When you get too low in your calories, your body goes into kind of a starvation state. And what it wants to do is find easy energy that comes in. So first, instead of mobilizing the fat in the body, what it does is looks for blood sugar and utilizes blood sugar. Second, it looks for muscle tissue because muscle tissue is easier to utilize as energy than even fat is. And that causes us to kind of retain. So if you're a person that kind of is struggling to lose that weight, even though you feel like you're at a very low calorie deficit, you might want to increase your calories, continue to fuel your muscle mass or your mitochondria so that you can start to burn and utilize that body fat. But if we're craving fatty foods, it's usually an indication that we're eating too few calories. Make sure that you're listening to your hunger, okay? Make sure that when you're having hunger pains, that you first analyze it real quickly. Am I stressed out? Is something going on? But don't try to avoid it or toughen through it too much, okay? Unless you're really tracking your calories and you're really looking to get that six-pack and those types of things. But listen to your hunger. When you're hungry, feed it responsibly. So doesn't mean that you have to go hungry, but when you go hungry and when you are hungry, don't be reaching for the processed food. Be reaching for the fruits and the vegetables and the nuts and all those types of things, okay? Make sure that you're feeding it responsibly and listening to it. Other factors that we got to make sure that we're mindful of from fatty food cravings and why our calorie needs may increase from one day to the next is intense workouts are going to increase your calorie needs. High stress is going to increase your calorie needs. Maybe you forgot to eat eggs with your breakfast, so you're a little bit lower in your calories, or maybe you forgot that meal completely. That may lead you to craving some fatty foods just because your overall calories are low because you missed a meal. The other thing, like we talked about in the top two, is imbalanced meals or lacking some balance, missing a macronutrient. A lot of the times that's protein. Sometimes it is fat, but having an imbalanced meal is going to lower your overall calories, again, leading to those fatty food cravings. What can we do? Eat protein, carbs, and fats at each meal, and then always remember that veggies are carbohydrates, okay? So even though they may not have a ton of calories, they take a lot of energy and a lot of effort and work by the digestive tract to digest. So when you're full of veggies, even though it may be very low in overall calories, your body's not going to want to take in or tell you to bring in more calories because it's going to be working its butt off to try to digest those calories that are already in it, okay? And then when we do have other carbohydrates aside from vegetables, make sure we're pairing those with proteins, with good fats, and looking at fruits, like we said, that have a lot of fiber in it, okay? Last one is chocolate, okay? Chocolate is due to low magnesium. It's a common deficiency. That being low magnesium is a common deficiency. It is not a worldwide type of thing. There's some diets and some nutrition and some eating styles around the world that that are higher in magnesium, but most American diets are low in magnesium. Ladies, during the time of the month when your body is going through the cycle, it is depleting its magnesium to go through that period cycle, and that's what causes those cravings to increase around the time of the month. Now, a little bit of dark chocolate once a day, small amounts is not a bad thing. That's not a bad way to do it, but got to stay away from the milk chocolate and the chocolate that is further away from that 100% cocoa, right? That 100% cocoa is going to be a lot higher in magnesium. Other ways to combat this, if you're not a dark chocolate fan, you don't like that bitter taste, excuse me, is bananas, tofu, edamame, however you say that. The nice thing about edamame is that can be a snack food that you use that does not very calorie dense. Bananas is going to be a little bit more calorie dense. And then also you're looking at some of those issues we talked about with blood insulin spikes and insulin crashes. Great one is avocados. That's why around that time of the month, ladies, during your cycle, having half an avocado, a quarter an avocado, or a half, depending on your calorie needs, can be very beneficial for menstrual cramps and all that type of stuff. Whole grains, cultured yogurt, so the active yogurts, the Activias, those types of things. And then look, another one that shows up is our daily salads. Those leafy greens are high in magnesium. And then my favorite, pumpkin, okay? But that doesn't mean pumpkin spice lattes. Wish it did. It'd be a lot better if it did. But pumpkins and also chia seeds is another one on there, but I wanted to end with pumpkin. So ways to combat. If you find yourself craving chocolate, make sure that you have enough magnesium in your diet. Maybe that's banana and peanut butter with some eggs for breakfast. Maybe you are a vegetarian. I don't think anybody that I work with right now is a vegetarian. Maybe that's adding some tofu. Maybe you like some edamame, could add a little bit of salt to help out with maybe some hydration as well. But then adding avocados to your leafy greens at lunch, or having some pumpkin. Pumpkin, how would you have that? I'd have to think about how you would have that other than in breads and stuff like that. Pumpkin seeds would be a great way to ingest those if you like to kind of roast some pumpkin seeds, or adding chia seeds to some shakes and stuff like that would be a great idea, okay? So if you're craving chocolate, cocoa, if you can go with some of those small pieces of dark chocolate, more power to you. But if you need to find other ways to kind of keep you away from the sweeter chocolates and the milk chocolates, look at avocados. Also, ladies, like I said, that'll help with during menstrual cycle. So 4 things to keep in mind. Like everything when we talk about nutrition, whether it be cravings, whether it be starting out with a balanced diet, is eat whole foods, okay? Eat whole foods. Try to eat balanced meals, carbs, fats, and proteins. And if we pair that with whole foods, that means those carbohydrates are coming from veggies, potatoes, some whole grains, which means breads and some of that type of stuff. And then fats, okay? If we're talking about fats, we're talking about avocado, we're talking about animal fats, we're talking about nuts. Those are going to be your good fats when we pair that with number 1. And then proteins. When we talk about proteins, we're talking about tofu, edamame, as we talked earlier in the magnesium portion. We're also talking about your animal proteins, cottage cheese, which is an animal protein as well. And some of the other whole grain, you get a little bit of protein from some of that. But those are your proteins. So remember, pair number 1, is this a whole food? And then am I getting a balanced amount of carbs, fats, proteins? Number 3, make sure that you're drinking enough water. Make sure that you're setting up some goals, some landmarks for yourself to hit each day. Remember, if you're a person that is bad at drinking or poor at drinking water and you're just getting started, to front end load your water in the day so that you're not up 2 or 3 times in the middle of the night. Because number 4 is get enough sleep. And if we're waking up to go to the bathroom all the time, we're going to struggle with getting enough sleep because we're trying to fall asleep every couple of hours because we're in the bathroom. Okay. So any questions on that? I would love to get you guys' feedback. Hopefully that helps out a little bit. If you guys have any other topics, anything else you'd like me to discuss, I'm more than happy to help you out. I'm so proud of each and every one of you. I appreciate you guys as clients. It is truly an honor to have the opportunity to help each and every one of you. Remember, one thing that I'm going to talk about on Monday is minimal effective dose, okay? So just take one thing, make one improvement consistently over the next week. And once you got that handled for a week, then add another effective dose or another small improvement over the next week. But be consistent, okay? Be consistent. Nutrition is all about consistency. It's all about having a little bit of grace for yourself, but setting those guidelines. These are the numbers that I hit. This is how I eat. Set that standard for yourself and always try and strive to improve. Hope you guys are doing well. Peace, love, and gains. God bless.